So, welcome to It Doesn't Hurt to Ask, brought to you by the Fundraising Lab. In each episode, we talk to what we like to call shift disturbers in the world of philanthropy. These are the folks who are shaking up traditional philanthropy and traditional fundraising practices. Today, I'm speaking with Paul Taylor from FoodShare Toronto. So, thank you so much for joining me and welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Cathy. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, my pleasure. I've been watching you from afar on LinkedIn mostly, and really jumped at the chance to meet you and speak with you today. So thanks for agreeing to join me.
You bet.
All right. So as I said, we interview what I like to call shift disturbers, and based on what I've seen from you, I'd say you definitely fall into that category. If it's okay, I'd like to set the stage by introducing you a little bit. So, Executive Director of FoodShare Toronto, lifelong anti-poverty activist, champion for the right to food, and to paraphrase your words, growing up materially poor in Toronto inspired you to commit your life to doing what you can to dismantle the systems of oppression that cause and uphold food insecurity and wealth inequality, including neoliberalism and white supremacy. Now, in case folks aren't familiar with what neoliberalism is, it's a belief in smaller government and that, capitalism will take care of everything. All right. You've got an incredibly impressive resume. You've been named one of Canada's top 40 under 40, one of Toronto Life's 50 most influential Torontonians, voted best activist by readers of Now magazine. And you teach at Simon Fraser University. Oh, and you're a regular commentator on CTV, and you write for print media as well, in your spare time. So listen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, I'm again so delighted to be here. I think, even like the name of there are two things that jump out at me. Love the name of this podcast. It doesn't hurt to ask, because that is critical, that it doesn't hurt to ask, and it's important to ask, but also, shift disturbers. I like that. I'll take it. It sounds a lot nicer than what some have called me. So I will gladly accept the moniker. Thank you.
Right. All right. Before we launch into our conversation, I do just want to start by saying that I'm speaking to everyone who's listening from the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, what I call Nova Scotia. Do you want to share a land acknowledgement or talk about where you're from?
Happy to. Oh, but I love Nova Scotia. I was out there not too long ago and got to spend some time with some Mi'kmaq people and learning about the history. But I am here, where am I? Usually I'm on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. But this week I'm out in Coast Salish territory, so the territory of the Skohomish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And, when I think about land, and, I do a lot of work around food. So I think about the modern industrial food system and where it began. And it's not lost on me that, our modern industrial food system began on stolen land, with stolen bodies farming on stolen land, the stolen bodies of my ancestors. So that really grounds me in the recognition that Indigenous sovereignty and Black liberation are inextricably tied. So in addition to acknowledging the land, I do what I can to help and support to advance Indigenous sovereignty in ways that I take my cue from Indigenous leaders and Indigenous friends.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so I've spent over 30 years working in social change philanthropy. And I have felt frustrated over the years that social change really has not attracted the same kind of philanthropy dollars that other causes have attracted. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about fundraising or philanthropy specifically related to the social change work that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's highly problematic. And I think first thing I try and think about the context in which we all do our work. And it's that much of this work has been downloaded from governments who have more resources than we do to address the kinds of wicked problems that we're trying to tackle or move the dial on. So that for me is the first bit of the conundrum. And I think I think it's incumbent upon us in the sector to be able to say to government, well, wait a minute, we are doing your work in lots of ways. We have things like a right to housing and a right to food that governments are not honoring. And now we've made those charitable questions of charity and philanthropy, and not one centered in people's fundamental human rights. Now, if this was the right of a corporation to extract as much wealth as they possibly could, we know that those corporations and their lobbyists would be lined up to make sure that the government held up their end of the bargain. So, it's not surprising that the kind of work the kind of shift change work, the kind of systems change work that is so important is underfunded, because I think we have to ask ourselves the question, why was it downloaded in the first place? And why aren't governments coming with the dollars that they know is required to address these wicked problems? And why are we as a society and nonprofits and charities allowing for these political questions, these questions of our human rights? Why do we sometimes participate in making them charitable questions?
I love that question. And, it's been interesting in the last few years, where I've been working with people who are new to the sector and are asking questions like that. And I reflected on how, when I joined the sector, it never occurred to me to even ask those questions, right? Well, I was introduced to this sector and the way that it worked. And I think it's only more recently that these questions are being asked, that the systems that exist are being really challenged. And it's really refreshing to see it. It's difficult to be in the midst of change, but it's refreshing to see it.
For sure. One of the questions that has me, somewhat excited is around, the pushing back around the disbursement quota for foundations, that they, I'm sure you guessed this, I'm sure your listeners have guessed this based on some of the things I may have said already, but I'm a fan of taxation. I think taxation is a perfectly fine tool to address some of the wicked problems we navigate. So anything that allows us to have more fair taxation, and take some of these questions again away from charity, and says, and if they are going to be the responsibility of charity, that the government's responsibility, whether through taxation or direct funding, is to make sure that they're funded adequately, so that people can access these fundamental human rights like the right to food and the right to housing.
Yeah. I love that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so as an executive director, how are you, or how do you like to be involved in fundraising in your organization? And I ask this because many of the listeners are fundraisers, and it might be interesting for them to hear your thoughts about your role in fundraising.
Great. So, I'm going to start this with, to be a racialized person in fundraising, particularly a Black person, I think, or an Indigenous person, is a very unique experience, I think, especially when we recognize that those with the most resources, power resources, material resources in society are typically white. So if we're having to contort and beg and ask, more often than not, rich white men for money, that could be not only triggering, but it can replicate some harmful and painful experiences. So one of the things that I often suggest that organizations do is, one, recognize that there is a difference, and there is additional labor that folks of color often have to take on in engaging in fundraising work. So thinking about that as we design the systems of support for fundraisers, and rooting equity in that design. And then also recognizing, I say to fundraisers of color, you do what you need to do if you enjoy this work, you do what you need to do it in a way that feels good to you. For me, what feels good to me is not begging rich white men for money. So I have some colleagues who are more comfortable with doing that, certainly. But also, I think the thing that we do is we actually don't center our funders. And I think that's something that too many organizations do. And one of the ways that I tell them to think about or to recognize how they do that is think about when you receive an email from a funder or a phone message from a funder versus when you receive an email or a phone message from a program participant. Who are you going to respond to first? So more often than not, people are responding to the donor right away. So what we try to do is we try and recognize, and not just in words only, that we have an allegiance to the people for whom are navigating the issues that we're working on, the folks that we are truly collaborating with. So sometimes it means creating space also for my colleagues and I to be able to recognize that it's okay to say no to money. Because we get stuck in this trap also that I think tells us that our success is based on the size of our budget, and that can cause all kinds of harm. You see in nonprofit organizations and charities people with these really long titles, and it's become a bit of a joke. But these long titles are a reflection of the kind of scarcity mentality that's been applied to securing resources, and means that we're throwing more work onto people and not setting themselves up for success. So for me, as a fundraiser, and maybe as the lead fundraiser of my organization, it's about how do I recognize that everyone's approach to fundraising is going to be different. Everyone has a history that they're bringing to their fundraising work. And then how do we make sure that we're providing the types of support that folks need to be able to do this work well, and to recognize that many of the ways that we think about fundraising, many of the ways that we think about the sector are based on colonialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. Doesn't serve many of us. So again, that invitation to disrupt, that invitation to say, let's recognize that these are harmful. These have not been designed by us for us. So we need to be able to be designing for us and be able to make sure that we are seizing opportunities to create approaches that work for us.
Okay. Whew. All right. That was a lot. The first thing I want to say is yes to saying no. I think that you're right. People often feel like hiring a fundraiser in their organization means that somehow they have automatically sold their soul to the man, and that they don't have agency. And so I love that you reminded us that sometimes you have to say no, and that's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you a question. So I realize and understand the privilege that I have as a white woman working in this sector. When I work with clients who talk about conflate fundraising and begging, I often say my experience of fundraising, and this is, I want to ask you what you think about this, is that I don't beg donors for money. I like to think that my clients present donors with an opportunity to make a difference, and we either inspire them to be part of that or not. What are your thoughts about that?
I could have the same lens of government. I would like to not beg them to uphold and center my human rights, but unfortunately, many of us are forced to be on the streets and advocating for our human rights to be upheld. So I think it's part of that difference in terms of, for many folks, this is, being in a position to request money or even present an opportunity to a potential donor is it's too close to, and it not only too close to some of the harmful experiences we've had in the past, but it can just the simple act of being in those spaces that are not made for us. When we think about the golf course, I don't know how to play golf. I'll never learn how to play golf. I have no desire to play golf, because those spaces, that is not a space, that I feel particularly welcome in. So it's not just about the ask or the invitation to give, it's about being in those spaces, and the compromises and the additional labor that we have to take on just to be in the space is labor that others don't have to take on or may not recognize, which means the harm that gets caused is often not recognized recognized, and there's no follow-up. This is harm that people are navigating on their own and having to go to their communities for support instead of their organizations. I want to come back to the piece around saying no, if I may, just for 1 minute, because I
Sure.
think it's really important, and I don't want folks to feel like it's an abstract thing for my colleagues and I at FoodShare. I'll give you a prime example. There's an organization called Weight Watchers who got in touch with us, and I think they wanted to give us some money and maybe an award. I can't remember, but definitely some money. And we publicly said no, because we felt like some of the work that they do is centers around fat shaming. And for us doing work around food, we're really intentional and mindful of not telling people what to eat and not telling people what their bodies should look like. People are the experts in that. What we're focused on is increasing access to the things the things, the fresh produce that people have had their access denied. So we said no, and we said no publicly, and we encourage Weight Watchers to really rethink their approach and the harm that it causes people. So, that was more public. A lot of times it's very private. A lot of times we're having these long, if we feel that there's some room and space and willingness from an organization to learn, evolve, and think a little bit differently and integrate newer perspectives or more diverse perspectives, well, then we will spend a little bit more energy in having that conversation, that ongoing conversation, and building that relationship, even if we're saying no at first, because for us, it's an opportunity to change the way that organization works and hopefully mitigate some of the harm that our colleagues and colleagues in other organizations might face.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
A very that's a great example for people to think about. What, if any, are things related to philanthropy are giving you hope, or if not hope, at least seeing that maybe some barriers are being dismantled or addressed?
What's giving me hope? I think one of the things that's giving me hope is recognizing that whether someone is a donor or whether an individual donor, they're coming from a foundation, I think the expectation and I'm so grateful for the work of folks like Chris Archie and her team at the Circle on Philanthropy. They've really helped, I think, folks recognize that there's actually work to do as a donor, as a foundation. The work doesn't end with going to a meeting and signing a check and giving it to your favorite charity. There is work around how foundations work, what types of expectations donors have of, I'm of the view that, gone are the days where donors should be coming in and expecting to see, people lined up at a food bank and feeling good about themselves. Donors, I think, are being challenged to think differently about what they should be able to expect. And that it's a relationship that's based on collaboration, and money is one of the inputs that helps advance our collective impact, but there are many others that need to be valued. So I think we've done a great job in the sector of valuing the financial and material contributions. So I think we need donors and everybody else to also recognize that there are folks working at the front lines of our organizations who are rarely held up, rarely celebrated, and certainly not paid enough in more cases than not. So I'm excited about those kinds of conversations. I'm excited about the kind of lens that's been placed on the race-based inequities in terms of where funds go. And the really specific conversations that highlights what myself and what many folks that maybe look like me have experienced, that we see organizations that are Black-led, that are Indigenous-led, that are led by other racialized folks, that we have a much harder time attracting the dollars, especially those big dollars. And when we see things like capacity building dollars made available, typically those historically have gone to already large, or even medium-sized white-led organizations. And in essence, building the capacity of white leadership and likely a predominantly white management and leadership team. Now the conversation seems to be really shifting. We're in conversations about trust-based philanthropy. We're having conversations about longer-term relationships, not one-year projects. Enough of us have said that many times, that it seems to have landed, and folks are now recognizing that it is about a relationship, it is about trust. So that's really exciting me. I'm also excited about the kind of initiating of conversations within traditional settler philanthropy that's looking at a decolonized approach to philanthropy, to relationship building. So those are the things that are really, really exciting me at the moment, I would say.
Awesome. We promised that we would keep this at around 20 minutes, and we've reached 20 minutes. So last word to you. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I actually, one other thing is exciting me. I never thought I would do this, but I don't know if you've heard, but I've announced that I'm leaving FoodShare at the end of this year, beginning of next. So I've been spending a fair bit of time working with another team now, using my evenings and weekends to do some work consulting and supporting, aptly named Evenings and Weekends Consulting, but supporting organizations across the sector that are wanting to kind of think differently about their work, are wanting to push back in new and exciting ways. So for me, that's been a lot of fun to devote my evenings and weekends to working with groups like that. And then looking forward to, in the new year, being able to spend my daytime hours doing that work as well, because I'm really interested in sector-wide impact, and I think sector and society-wide impact. And I think, as much as I love the work that I've done at FoodShare, I think there is an opportunity to support organizations that are ready to really roll up their sleeves and advance really good change.
I've, as I said, I've been watching you from afar. Really am inspired by some of the changes that you have inspired in that you've inspired in the sector. I heard a CBC show on the radio the other day, and they were talking about paying interviewees. So there you go. That I know that you've gotten a lot of coverage around that, but that was awesome. I am looking forward to watching you continue to shift, disturb in the sector.
Thank you so much, Cathy. I love the work that you're doing. And again, a real pleasure to be invited to join you today.
Thanks so much. I was delighted to chat with Paul today. If you want to learn more about Paul, follow him on LinkedIn. If you like this podcast, we'd love it if you'd rate and review it. If you like this and want to check out other resources by the Fundraising Lab, you can find us at fundraisinglab.ca. And like my mom always said, it doesn't hurt to ask.